Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I speak with a husband-wife team based in Denver, Colorado, and known for their books on true crime. Stephen was a freelance journalist from 1974 to 1981. He's gone on to write over 24 books after his Rolling Stone article on the murder of talk radio host Alan Berg led him to write his first book. Talk to Death was published in 1987, was made into a stage play and a 1988 film by Oliver Stone. Since 1991, Stephen's wife Joyce has collaborated with him on 8 true crime books. Joyce has also attended legal proceedings, visited inmates in prison, interviewed witnesses, and studied forensic data for research on their works. On episode 12 of Your Take, I speak with writers Stephen and Joyce Singular. We speak true crime, seeking the truth, and about their lives and careers. Thanks for joining me today for Your Take. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you for having us.
And we have a slight time difference. You're based in Denver, Colorado, so I think you're something like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and here in the UK, in Bristol, we're 9 o'clock in the evening. But yeah, thanks for joining me on today's program. What we kind of like to do on Your Take is look back at your careers, your early years and current projects, and just to find out about your lives and what you've done in terms of your writing. But simply to start with, I kind of wanted to go back right to the beginning and ask you both the same question. I just want you to just paint a picture of where you were both born and just a bit about your upbringing before you became writers and went on to meet one another and become a married couple.
Yes, I was born in a very small town in Kansas. Kansas is in the Midwest of the United States. People are not in the United States. And the relevance of that really, in part, having to do with the first book I wrote called Talk to Death, was that I was very connected to the radio. This was before television was as widespread as it is today. And radio was the primary medium that I sort of connected with and resonated with. So that lifelong development, or that lifelong attachment to radio, music mostly at that time, certainly a lot of British music that was coming over in the 60s and all of that,
Blues.
But then and blues primarily, but then it evolved as talk radio came in, and I moved to Denver in 1981, just when I was starting to listen to talk radio in this market, and that led me to Alan Berg, and that led to the first book that I wrote. So my small town upbringing had that radio connection that actually spread through the whole rest of the story.
I'm interested to talk to you later about the radio connection and obviously the fascinating first book on Alan Berg. We'll discuss that a bit later. Joyce, I just wanted to ask you the same question, a bit about your upbringing, where you were born, and did you have a happy childhood? And yeah, just tell us a bit of background.
Yes, I was born in Denver, Colorado,
Sure.
and from a large Catholic family. So I attended 13 years of Catholic schooling, rigorous academic schooling. And I always had an interest in writing. I had a great childhood, but 4 sisters and 1 brother, or brother, you know. And when I met Steve, when I think it was in 1990.
1990, October.
We met at a after party of the Denver International Film Festival. And he came to, my parents owned a restaurant and I was helping manage the restaurant. And he came and brought a book to me Talk to Death, and he put his name in it and his phone number, and he said, if you are interested in the book, I'd love to answer any questions. So of course I read the book, and I had a million questions. I thought it was very well written. I think it's one of the best books that he's written. And so we determined that we both had this interest in true crime, but not true crime for just the grisly sensationalism of it, but more within a larger social context. We were both interested in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. I'd always been interested in that. So when we started living together and then ultimately got married about a year later, I started attending murder trials with him and found that I was observing things from a woman's point of view, and then found that two genders are better than one in seeing a case and interviewing people and having access to people and not being so intimidated, having the people that you interview be more comfortable with a couple. And at that time we had a young child too. So we found that working together, we brought both points of view in, and then we would put our writings together, and then Steve would write the first draft of something, and I would go in and say, yeah, I think you should take that out, or I would sort of edit what I thought, needed to be edited. And that's how it all began.
Yeah, you mentioned you met in 1990, and then fast forward the clock pretty much a year later, and you started collaborating as a couple, as a husband-wife team. How do you find that, working as a collaborative team, and how does that kind of work? How does the balance work between the actual writing of the book and the actual process of the research and what goes into that?
I'll answer first, and then you can add. We find that we work very well together. We both bring a lot to the table. I'm more of an idea person. Steve has a journalistic background, having worked at the Denver Post as a reporter for a while. So he brings the factual. I tend to bring more of a creative. I kind of know what women would like to read, and women drive the true crime market. They typically buy more of these types of books, and they watch a lot of the programs that are on Oxygen. I don't know what channels you have in Great Britain, but here it's a big genre for women. And I think we work well together. The funny thing about us is we work well together, but it's little household chores and things like that is where we tend to bicker. And you'd think that working, on Murder and Mayhem would be stressful, but no, that's
easy. That's the easy
easy
part.
Yeah.
It's washing the dishes is what's difficult.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
no, I can't possibly add anything to that. That pretty well sums it up. In the early 90s, I got busier and busier writing books. Sometimes there were 2 book contracts.
Sure.
So Joyce had to go to trials while I was writing something,
Right.
And take on more of that role, and it just kind of naturally evolved from there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Joyce.
And also, I just wanted to add that sometimes I would be reading the paper or watching the news, because I'm a news hound, and I would say, Steve, I think we should go look into this story. And I've done that more than once. And at first, Steve would be resistant sometimes. But then when we got into the story, he saw the possibilities. And some of the things have been made into movies. And, in one instance, when we wrote about Warren Jeffs, who was a polygamist in Arizona and Utah, that led to us being invited to the Senate Majority Leader's hearing on crimes associated with polygamy. So it's interesting that from one small idea, it can grow. It's almost like having a child. You grow the child, you let him out into the world, and you never know what's going to come of it until it goes out there. It has a life of its own.
There's a kind of equation around writing about true crime that I found, which is that if you're writing about high-profile cases, there's a lot of media coverage that just descends on it. Obviously, some of the bigger cases we've worked on, and that's not necessarily the best time to just come in and pounce on people. But if you let a little bit of time pass, 2 or 3 months maybe, the media goes away, the tension, the emotion around the event kind of subsides. And then people really do want to talk in more depth often about their experience. But the shock of what happens when somebody in your family's murdered, or somebody you know is murdered, or something like that, you know, the daily media gets that. But to go deeper, right, it just takes a little time. So a number of the things Joyce has suggested have worked out. So again, it's a good combination.
Joyce mentioned in my previous question about your career previous to writing books as a freelance journalist, which is significant. I just wanted to ask your memories from working as a freelance journalist back in the late 70s and early 80s, and what made you decide to move away from journalism to actually writing and publishing your own books?
Well, I was living in New York. I lived in New York from 1973 to 81. It was a thrill to sort of go from nowhere in 1974 when I started writing, and a couple of years later was writing stories for the New York Times Magazine. So as a kid from the hinterlands out there in Kansas, you know, to be in the offices of the New York Times and dealing with those people was a very memorable and great way to start all of this out. I just burned out on living in New York after those 8 years, and my sister lived in Denver, and I came out here to stay for a week or two, and it's 40 years later, you know, this September. I've never left. But when I got here, she had a friend, and she said, there's this guy on the radio named Alan Berg, and he's very, very controversial, and I guess I told them I was interested in the radio and all of that. And so I started listening to him, and I interviewed him before I actually had a job at the Denver Post. I was working freelance for them. And so I interviewed him, you know, before he was dead, obviously. And that was a great help in writing about him later on, because I was face to face with him. I saw how he talked, how he acted when he was in the radio studio, how he acted when he was not there, not on, and very, very helpful. So there was no conscious decision to just stop writing for magazines and start writing books. But Rolling Stone asked me to write an article about him after he was assassinated, and I did. And then somebody in New York was becoming a literary agent just at that time. He'd been an editor at a major publishing house. And he said, why don't we try to sell this as a book? And so once that happened, once the book got sold, I mean, I sort of fell into the true crime arena. I mean, again, it wasn't something that was planned. But once I got there, once I started going to trials and going into prisons and talking with people, it's inherently dramatic. As Joyce said, if you're looking for those stories that are about not just a specific crime, but about a larger social issue. In the Berg case, it's obviously racism, anti-Semitism, the rise of the radical right, you know, still a very important theme in American culture and society. So in a way, I was very fortunate that first book, not only did it become an Oliver Stone movie, and get translated into several other languages and all of those good things, but it laid the groundwork for a theme that we would explore over and over again, which is sort of where religion or bad religion meets violence and crime. And that kind of set the template for many, many things that we're going to follow with racism, with, again, religion, and all of those things. So once I started writing books, I mean, once you do that, it's pretty hard to go back to the magazine world. You want to go bigger.
It's an absolutely fascinating book, and I've been a huge admirer of the book for many years. And what I like about it is you're dealing with, like you say, this very three-dimensional talk radio host who's almost like a Howard Stern of his day,
Like
and also. Yeah, and then you're dealing with this white supremacist, neo-Nazi terrorist organization, the Order. And also you mentioned that it was picked up by, it became a radio play, a successful radio stage show, and then it became the Oliver Stone film in 1988. I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on the film adaptation by Stone. Were you involved in the process? Did you have any dealings with writing the script? And what was your impression of the finished film compared to your book?
Well, it's kind of, it would not be great of me to say I'm not happy that he purchased the rights to the book. People purchase the rights to the book so that they can make the movies they want to.
Sure.
You know, and so I was not part of the writing process. I was not part of that creative process. It was the melding together, you know, of the book and the play. There are parts of the movie that I like a lot. I mean, the thing that isn't really there is that Alan Berg was very funny. His saving grace for this acerbic, sarcastic personality on the air was that he was also very funny, and he had self-deprecating humor. He could make fun of himself and others, and that was sort of, you know, his saving grace, as I said. The movie really doesn't have that. If it had more humor, it would be, I think, an easier movie to watch. So that dimension was not really there. The movie is also not as political as the reality. I mean, you get the sense that this is just one person out there haranguing the man on the radio. And when Berg was killed, actually, in Denver, that's what they thought had happened. It was just one person who was very angry. It's a much bigger story than that. So.
And it's come full circle. Back then, these right-wing, very, you know, the order types of people, groups, militia groups, they were on the fringes. And now it's come to the point where they're, you know, it's taken over. It's much bigger. The internet helped them to mobilize and to organize. The internet changed a lot.
Yeah.
You know, in the I think it was in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
When the internet started, you know, when people started coming on, getting personal computers, and that really seemed to escalate the ability of those groups to
the fantasy of the order that they talked about was, oh, one day we'll have computers and we'll link all of our people together and we'll be more powerful. And that's even occurred internationally. I mean, some of these international incidents, these people have been supported by Americans or others. So that has truly come to pass. And as I always say, we've gone from 9 guys sitting in the woods in the Northwest of America, you know, creating the silent brotherhood, and they're going to create a white power revolution, to essentially some of the same ideas coming out of the White House in the last few years, and resulting in part in January 6, 2021 in the United States, where you have people in insurrection, you know, wanting to put down the government or take over the government or defy an election or deny a president who's just been elected to take office. So this sort of particular cancer, if you will, has grown, and the internet is a big part of it.
I agree with your sentiments on the film. I'm an Oliver Stone fan, I must admit, and I do like some of his films, but I feel the big problem with the film is there's no real backstory about Alan Berg or the order. We're not presented with any kind of facts or details about his history. We just literally go straight into the radio show and the conversations that go on, you know, on the air live. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. I just wanted to ask Joyce a question. Most of the books you've written have dealt with, obviously, true crime. What fascinates you with this subject, and what is your kind of overall motive? Are you writing books to kind of seek the ultimate truth? Are you looking to sort of bring about justice, or what's kind of the overall motive for you both?
Well, I guess for me, truth is definitely stranger than fiction in this realm. Some of the stories and books that we've worked on, you could never make up. In no way. And some of the books we've tried to shine a light on social issues, and that's what happened in the Warren Jeffs book, When Men Become Gods. Writing a book about a subject where there's a group of people that are living in a very insular and closed society and under the radar, not only that book, but other people and the women that came forward to, push back against that polygamous leader and others like them, it helped shine a light so that on this social issue, so that now they know that people are watching them. So that was very gratifying to see that happen. And Steve and I have always been interested in the psychological aspect of why somebody that lives next door that has a seemingly ordinary, banal job could have a double life, a secret life, go out and be a serial killer. And it makes people that know those people not even trust their instincts anymore or their perceptions, because they're thinking, I've dealt with this serial killer day in and day out, and I didn't know anything was off with him. We find that particularly fascinating, the psychological element.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's probably the foundation of it. I mean, this sounds kind of pretentious, I guess, but I just sort of grew up very interested in evil, the nature of evil. What does that mean? What is it? How does it operate? I wasn't in a religious sense. I wasn't religious from a very young age, but just how it operates inside of an individual. How do you justify and rationalize your behavior, which may be going out killing someone in the afternoon and coming home for dinner with your wife and kids and watching a television show? How does that operate in the mind? And then in a larger sense, how does it operate in society? I've talked a lot about my father, who was a prisoner of war in Germany in World War II. I grew up 5 years after he got out of the prison camp. And so there was this whole sort of aura of evil over all of that. And when I would watch the shows about Germany, I'd want to know, how does propaganda work? How does it actually work on a society? And I'm old enough now to know how it works. I've seen it work in the society I live inside. I've seen people being controlled by complete illusions and delusions. And if they just accept.
Or also, if I could interject, if something is repeated often enough, people will tend to believe it. I mean, if it's broadcast 24/7, the advent of cable television also contributed to this situation where people were not thinking for themselves, but listening to talking heads and not making up their own minds, not being critical thinkers. So all of that has contributed to how we've, the fascination with that, how people can be so easily controlled. Our latest book came out in October of 2020. It's called Killer Cults. It was an anthology where we profiled 16 different cults from all around the world. And what was so fascinating about that was that it wasn't just one socioeconomic group that could be easily swayed. There were very well-educated people that fell under the spell of these charismatic types. And then there was also very poor, marginalized people that did the same thing. So we learned a lot by working on that anthology, I think.
The rise of social media has also played a very interesting role in intersecting with true crime, especially in cases that are unresolved or ambiguous, or where verdicts are created that sometimes the public doesn't agree with. Because, in the past you had your 3 networks and your 3 or 4 major newspapers, and that was basically how people got information. But now, with the internet, it's like you can go on and get any version of the truth you want. You can accept any version of the truth you want about a crime or anything else. So I think it's made seeking out the truth, somewhat more important, because there's so much opinion, projection, assumption that just gets in the way. I mean, we've worked on some very high-profile cases where we haven't had the most popular point of view, and you come under a lot of criticism for that. Sometimes there are threats associated with it. All of those things, and if you're just trying to sort of be a journalist, be an investigator, stay down in the middle of the road. Try to find what facts are, as opposed to just overheated opinions that come off of talk radio or talk TV all day long. So the whole evolution of it has been very interesting. And we've been pretty much in the center of it.
A question for you both. we kind of live in an age, and I kind of give this from a UK, a British kind of perspective, where a lot of people have felt failed by institutions, particularly by the free press. In Britain, we've had, cases of journalists hacking into people's phones. People have kind of given up on, political institutions as well, on a political level, the police, justice as well. With sort of the media thing, do you think we're living in a very dangerous era when we have heads of states declaring that you shouldn't trust particular news corporations? And do you feel that maybe we're in a time where, do we still need a free press? Does it need to be censored in some ways? Or, what are kind of your views? I know there's a lot of questions in there, but what kind of are your views on these things?
Well, Steve, I think you should talk. We've talked about this before in other interviews, how journalism has changed, at least here in America, since
Sure.
when you first started out. I think that would.
Well, yeah, part of the corollary of what I'm saying is if you have 24 hours a day of opinion coming down on something, it's very difficult for journalism to compete with that. First of all, it's instantaneous. People hear about a crime, they jump to a conclusion, this person's guilty, lock them up. It's in violation of everything that Americans profess to believe in, everything in our Constitution, everything in the Bill of Rights, everything in the legal system, the presumption of innocence, all of that. We've just sort of chucked it out the window so that you can get ratings, on your radio show. I mean, that's dangerous. That in itself is dangerous. One of the things that's happened as a result of Trump and those 4 years is that investigative journalism, he sort of woke it up.
Yeah.
He woke up the New York Times, I think, has done some very good work.
The Washington Post.
Washington Post in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, they were kicked hard enough to say, we now have elected someone, or apparently elected someone, who doesn't like the media, does all of these negative things. And so I think there's been something of a reawakening in how, and I can't criticize that at all. But as in that true crime arena, if I've learned anything over these 35 years, it's that the truth is not often obvious. It's not as obvious as people want it to be. Just one little slogan around that, that we've encountered over and over. If, let's say the crime is murder, you can be guilty of something, but not necessarily guilty of murder. And that's a fine, subtle distinction, because you see it in people's behavior a lot when a crime occurs. Oh, well, that person, the way their posture says they're guilty, right?
Or the way they're behaving, or the way because they lawyered up right away, or because they didn't cry,
None of us has, I can't speak for you, but we haven't been in that position where we lost a child or somebody not close to us was murdered, or et cetera. How do we know how we would react and respond? We don't. It's just this massive projection onto other people as if they were just characters in a show, but that, they're real people. So that, the challenge in writing about this is to go below all of that and look at the contradictions and look at the evidence. And that, that's the fascinating part of it. That's what keeps, again, it's not the blood and the gore. It's all of those dynamics woven together. And there but forgotten, go I in these very serious criminal cases. So
my next question, I think what you kind of alluding to is that people are very complex and life is complex, and we try to sometimes generalize or stereotype or oversimplify things. But my next question, with all the research you've done for your books on real life crime and killers, have you actually gone as far as to meet any of those killers that have been in prison and speak with any of them as part of the research for the books?
Sure. Oh, sure. One of the more interesting ones was we went into the women's prison for a book that we worked on called Sweet Evil, about a young woman in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour south of Denver. And she dressed up in her husband's army fatigues she was having an affair, and her boyfriend convinced her that it would be okay as a Christian to gun down his wife that had lupus, that she would be forgiven. Again, where religion intersected with violence. So this was a woman that never had a parking ticket. She had never done anything. She was smart, intelligent, bright, just good personality. So she got a hold of the book and invited us to go down to visit her in the women's prison. And that was surreal, to go into the prison, very high security, maximum security prison. She was given life without possibility of parole. And she wanted to ultimately write her own book. She wanted us to help her write her book. And we tried to help her, but whenever she got to the point of the actual murder, she sort of disassociated, and she couldn't wrap her head around the actual moment where she pulled the trigger and gunned down this woman that had 2 or 3 young children, right? She had 3 children.
Yeah, 3 children.
Jennifer had 2 at the time.
Yeah.
There was something about the actual moment of committing the crime that she could just not face. Like she had to just compartmentalize it. It was sort of like the devil made me do it. Something came in and made me do this. It wasn't me. And we knew then that we couldn't help her write her version of the story.
And in that particular case, I mean, there was an erotic element because she was having an affair with the dead woman's husband. To take it a little bit further, I mean, violence is cathartic. Something you see over and over and over. The pressure builds up to commit a violent act, and then it's released, and then it's like the person didn't do it. The person wasn't there. This has been talked about by psychologists and other people. So for her to actually say something like, I really enjoyed having this affair. It was better than with my husband. And there was something very exciting about planning a murder. And then when I got there, there was this great catharsis in letting my violence out of myself. Coming to grips with it in a real way would have been interesting. But for her, it was just a deflection, you know.
Another thing we've noticed is that sometimes it takes 2 people to create a murder, whereas one person by themselves would not murder. Like say, for example, the Columbine shooting in the school here to the west of Denver, southwest in Littleton. Is it Klebold and Harris,
yeah.
Their names?
Yeah.
Alone, they would not have committed the murder, most likely. But the combination of the 2 personalities created the murder, just like in Cold Blood.
Yeah.
Hickok and Smith.
Yeah.
Same dynamic. That's what we're talking about, the psychological elements at play here with certain personality types that might not do anything on their own, but they come in contact with the right person that's able to coerce them or persuade them, and all of a sudden a murderer is born.
And it's a process, you know. Evil, they say, is evil a thing? Is it a person? No, it's a process. And this is a very good example where you see that this man just working on this woman over months and months. You know, will you go find a place, you know, where we could meet and have a rendezvous? You know, will you go get your husband's clothes in case we needed to use them in the crime? Will you go get his gun? You know, will you go stake out where my wife and I will be at 9 o'clock on this particular night? The name of the book is Sweet Evil. She was called this very sweet person. She committed the ultimate evil by killing this woman.
Well, and her quote was that he sweetened the evil when she was talking about the guy she was having the affair with. And that's where Steve got the idea to make the book's title, Sweet Evil.
She had this very, I thought, very wonderful family, parents anyway.
She did.
You know, and she kills the woman. She goes home. It's her husband's gun. She puts it under the bed. She makes them come home. She'd thrown them out of the house earlier. Makes them make love on top of the gun. And, you know, right before that, she called her parents. She didn't tell them anything, but she was so distraught. All she had to do was pick up the phone 3 hours earlier and say, I'm in trouble. I need help. They would have done anything in the world for her. And that woman would be alive today. And well, Jennifer herself is dead. But it's just a great example of how evil seeps into somebody's life when they give up their personal power.
Well, and you also interviewed the internet, the world's seemingly first internet serial killer, didn't you?
Yeah, no, I've been in a variety of prisons, and that wasn't a very long interview, but I've been in a number of prisons and interviewed, a number of felons. I mean, both for murder and other things. So it's a very powerful experience, and you just, I mean, again, sort of to repeat, but my view was never, oh, look how different they are from me, but in really bad circumstances, I might do the same thing. I'm not better. I'm not judging. I just want to know what their reality is and how they got to this point. And hopefully, if you write something like that, maybe it helps somebody else somewhere. That's what you're trying to do.
Again, on the subject of true crime, it's very popular and written in visual form. Several authors like yourself write books on true crime and make a living from doing so. We see hundreds of documentaries and content on streaming, and I think there's even television stations dedicated to real life documentaries. Why do you think we as people and as viewers and readers and consumption of media are so fascinated by crime, serial killers and unsolved cases?
Well, you mentioned unsolved cases. That an interesting development these days in cold cases is that the DNA is becoming the DNA process of solving, of genealogical databases coinciding with police databases has now led to many cold cases being solved. I mean, we have some that are 36 years old, and here in the States anyway, there's multiple cases that are now being solved with these people that are, submitting their DNA to Ancestry.com or these genealogical places to see who their relatives came from. And that is a fascinating aspect to us, that some of these crimes are now actually being solved that way, because the DNA is that process is much more sophisticated than when it first started.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I have a theory about your question. That's all it is. And I thought a lot about it in terms of actors. So many actors play so well when they're playing really bad people. And it's always struck me. I mean, Anthony Hopkins, your own Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, he's a serial killer. And I think what that is just, it's all inside of us. We all have these capacities, and the chance to sort of let it out and let it, perform some function like that where it's, entertaining and you get paid for it. It's cathartic. And I keep using that word. It must be a wonderful feeling to get it out that way. I mean, and I think modern life is full of tension. It's full of conflict. I mean, we have economic pressures, every other pressure. And I think it's kind of a ersatz substitute way to sort of put yourself in those situations and say, well, what would happen if I could?
Or it's sort of like riding a roller coaster. You can sit back in the safety of your home and watch this terrifying, show, but you're safe. It's like watching a horror film in a way. Right. You're safe with your popcorn and your blanket around you in the safety of your home, and then that person is doing it, and that person is.
And also, I think there is an educational aspect to it. I think people watching learn how people stalk people, how people manipulate people, how people gain your trust and to do whatever they want to do. So you can learn certain things by watching the shows and become a bit more sophisticated.
And forensics has become a big thing. And I don't know if you have programs in the UK, like we have CSI. We have so many versions of CSI, which are, these behavioral science unit departments that are solving cases through, scientific forensic, technology. That alone, the scientific aspect of it is also of interest to people.
Yeah.
I think you're right very much about the narrative of these things as well, because they're almost stranger than fiction. I can think of two examples of shows that I was gripped by, two documentaries, which were the first series of Making a Murderer, which I thought was fascinating from beginning to end, and the one that really caught my imagination, and I kept veering my opinion on whether the man was guilty or innocent, was the staircase. I don't know if you've seen that documentary series. It's an incredible narrative.
Heard of it. Yeah, I've heard of it. Many people have mentioned it. But we don't watch a lot of true crime because we live it basically. So
Sure.
when we watch shows, we want to be, we want to laugh, or we want escapism, or
That's true.
although we have watched some, like The Jinx on HBO, was fascinating.
Yeah, another one, another good example.
Yes. Mhm.
Those documentaries and podcast makers are really good.
Yeah.
I mean, they are really good at what they do. It's like a whole new art form, essentially,
Exactly.
springing up in the last 10 to 15 years.
Mhm.
Because you have such a strong narrative there in place. I mean, that's part of the attraction to writing about true crime. You don't have to make up the characters. You don't have to make up the drama. It's inherent in human life, when violence erupts. And, if you just have to place your sensibility on it.
For a moment, we'll steer away from true crime because we've spoken in quite some detail about it. But you've written over 24 books. You've covered so many subjects outside of real life crime. You've done sports biographies on the NFL superstar Terrell Owens. You've done Hollywood power players Michael Ovitz and David Geffen, and other books as well. What is kind of your favorite genre that you enjoy writing the most? And of all the books you've written, what's been your favorite project to date?
Well, nonfiction writing is the art of the possible. In other words, you have to have the right people in the right conditions to do it. So when we went down to Arizona and Utah to write about Warren Jeffs in 2006, we met the right people. And they were a police officer who had been sent into this town of 6,000 polygamists who don't obey the laws of the United States, who was there to bust them up essentially and prosecute crimes. And he was very lonely because everybody in town hated him, so he wanted to talk. His name is Gary Ingalls. He's a great guy. I met another woman named Elaine Tyler who was trying to help women who were escaping polygamy. She wanted to talk. So that was, as Joyce said, that was an excellent experience to go there, to meet the people, to meet the victims of this group that did, under Warren Jeffs, did a lot of terrible things. And then that led to the Senate hearing in 2008 with Harry Reid, which was a big thrill for us.
And then to see when the movie was made, they made a television movie of it, and they called that Outlaw Prophet, which is what we wanted to name the book in the first place. But many times the publishing houses have the final say on what they're going to title the book. So when we drove to Santa Fe, and what year was that?
2013.
Yeah, Steve is good with numbers.
14.
Okay, we drove to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they were right in the middle of filming now this book, and you're watching all these people get put to work. There's catering people and the gaffs and the people that are coming in with the casting and the costumes and the actors. And there's a scene there, we walked in where they were filming Warren Jeffs, talking to the congregation, everybody's in costume. And you're thinking to yourself, from just one little idea, let's go look into this. All of a sudden it branched out into that. It was, like I said, very surreal. That you really have to follow your gut instinct sometimes on what you think might interest people.
Right. We had a situation here, you're probably aware of, in 1993, where there was a religious sect at Waco, Texas, and the government went in and 76 men, women, and children died. And there were parallels between that situation and what they felt about the FLDS, the fundamentalist Mormons that we were writing about.
Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints.
Right. To watch our government go in without violence, without force, to try to sort of infiltrate and help these people was a very great thing from my point of view. I mean, we were fighting this war on terror, dropping bombs all day long on Afghanistan and Iraq, and doing all of that. How did that turn out? You know, confronting religious fanaticism or terrorism or all those things is a very, very difficult problem. And I was just very impressed with the way they had learned something from this stuff and the way they handled it. Nobody died. You know, a few people committed suicide under different circumstances, but there was a good resolution, and that is mostly been broken up, and people are on to better lives. And women have far more opportunities there, and children do too.
Yes.
So on all kinds of levels, it was like journalism played a good role there, not just us, but many different journalists shone a light on this dark place in America, and some good things happened. That's what you want.
Truman Capote's name's already been mentioned in Cold Blood earlier on in the in our conversation, but I wanted to ask you your writing influences, the writers that have inspired and influenced you the most, and also if you ever intend to write a fictional novel.
Well, why don't you go ahead and mention your fictional heroes?
Well, when I was in my 20s, I was saturated with literature, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. I mean, James Joyce and Henry James, and the great Jane Austen, Georgia. I just absorbed Dostoevsky, all of those, and I thought, well, this is the way to go. But that they're all literary geniuses, so that was not a path to go down. As I said, when Alan Berg died, somebody said, go write about this. And this entire world opens up of the law and how it operates in police. I just plugged right into it.
Well, I'm sorry. And when I'm in my youth, in my 20s, I was reading much more fiction. I like John Fowles, The Magus. I liked Nikos Kazantzakis, Zorba the Greek, Jane Austen, of course. Numerous fictional writers. These days, when I read it all, but it's harder for us to have to work on the computer and read both. Only do one or the other as you get older.
Sure.
These days I'm more interested in nonfiction, memoirs, comparative religions, spirituality. But after the Aurora Theater shooting book that we did in, what year was that?
It came out in 2015.
Okay. We worked on that with our son, and that was about the mass shooting that's going on in America, in the schools. This one was in a theater that we had all gone to as a family.
About 5 miles from here.
Yeah. And I covered that, and it was very disturbing because I had to sit through, and believe me, I've seen a lot, covering murder trials, as has Steve. But there was something about that particular subject, and watching the autopsy photos of, one victim was 6 years old, and these very high capacity rifles and semi-automatic weapons that are being used to commit these crimes. It was so disturbing. They had support dogs and outside of the courtroom that day. I remember, I was wondering, I wonder what those dogs are there for. Well, after we came out of court, I saw that the dogs were for not only the spectators in the gallery, but the attorneys, the witnesses, whoever needed to, have a little bit of comfort from an animal. So I told Steve then, I said, why don't we try something new? Why don't we try writing a fictional screenplay? Because we've always wanted to write about New Mexico. We're fascinated by Santa Fe, the Los Alamos National Lab, where the Manhattan Project occurred. And it's just an interesting juxtaposition of these prehistoric, Anasazi ruins right next to the very high-tech satellites of Los Alamos National Laboratory.
One of the most sophisticated labs in the world.
Yeah, and so we started writing that, and it morphed into working with our son, who's now going to be 28 in about a week. And then that is now being shopped in Los Angeles by a producer. It's been optioned. And it's about the accidental discovery of of a renewable energy, free energy, so that we could do away with fossil fuels. So that has been very gratifying to write. And then we're also writing a short story, fictional, again, about, these asteroids that are coming into our solar system, and, the possible sightings of extraterrestrials, and just using more imaginative and non-violent, stories. Then it's been really gratifying.
The first story that she alluded to was, we've always been interested in Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And Tesla had 700 US patents, and he had a lot of ideas that were never developed in his lifetime, having to do with wireless energy transmission and a lot of things like that. So it's kind of a what if story. If one of those, they didn't have the math or the technology 100 years ago, but we have it today. And what if one of those ideas was actually developed? And that's basically the story.
And we're finding that in these times, I think people really want stories with hope, drama with hope. I know we do.
Yeah.
So that's where we think the next market lay, is in these stories that, like, that's why we watch Ted Lasso. It just makes you laugh, and it's creative, and it's fun, and it has a good message, a positive message.
Yeah, it's hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
How does the creative process kind of work for you? Because obviously you're mainly dealing with non-fiction, real life stories. Is it a case that you kind of constantly keeping a notebook and reading articles or things that you see that are newsworthy that you think, actually, this would be a good subject for the next book? How does that kind of process work for you? When you're working on a book or a project, I know it varies from book to book, but how long would it take you per se to work on one particular book, depending on obviously what research needs to go into it?
Each one's different.
Yeah.
About a year for a book project. I mean, that's a rough approximation. And yeah, we're always looking for stories. We're always looking for stories west of the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
The Mississippi River is a bit of a divide in the United States, from Canada to the Gulf of
to
Mexico. And there's a great deal more writers and press and media
in the east.
To the east, and some in Los Angeles, but not as much. So stories like the Warren Jeffs story and many other stories that we've written about, the Rocky Mountain West is somewhat isolated. I think there's 6% of the American population is in what's defined as the Rocky Mountain West. So anytime a story pops up here,
it's easier for us to research. I mean, we don't have to get on a plane and go do research. We can just drive.
Yeah.
And there's something about the wide open vistas and the wide open spaces of the West that captures people's attention, especially the publishers in New York.
Yeah. The West is a great area to write.
Very visual.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to any aspiring young writers who want to get into journalism or non-fiction writing and actually earn a living from it? What would your advice be in today's climate where you have more and more platforms, particularly digitally and online? Is it harder to make a living from this form now, or do you think with more choice and more options, do you think it's easier? What's kind of your take on that?
Well, everything depends on the story. If you can find a story that is multi-dimensional, that has some mystery in it, where everything is not answered, that it has an interesting locale. The West we just talked about. I mean, you might get a great story in a town in Wyoming out here in the West, a town of 2,000 people. Look for the story. The story will carry you a very long ways if it has enough dimensions to it to explore at the level of 250 or 300 pages. I was fortunate. I mean, the Berg story was like that. It went from a guy getting shot in his driveway one June night, 1984, to the largest investigation into domestic terrorism in American history at that point. It just mushroomed out like that. And so, I mean, that's what you're looking for
And I would say don't give up, because when I hadn't met Steve yet when he wrote Talk to Death, but you got quite a few rejections.
25.
And then finally, somebody got it. They knew that it was a good idea. And the same thing happened with the Warren Jeffs book. We were rejected multiple times until he got on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
He got arrested.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, we already had a book proposal out there. So don't give up if you get rejected. That's what my advice would say. If you have a gut instinct that it's a good story, just keep plugging away, whether it's a podcast, a treatment, a book proposal. Don't stop. Try to find a good agent to represent you. Agents are invaluable.
And don't assume that you know things you don't. That's sort of the core rule for a journalist. Go in truly with an open mind and explore it from that angle, because you're going to learn things you never learned. That's the wonderful experience of doing this. It's ongoing education.
True.
We move on to the final set of questions. I always enjoy hearing people's answers on these. These are just quick answers to some questions on things you like and maybe things you're not so keen on, what your hobbies are, aspirations, and so on. Question one for you both. What is your favorite pastime away from writing?
For me, travel, I would say, but that's limited now. Especially with the Delta variant, on the rise in the States. So travel's a little restricted right now, but you can always jump in the car and go on a road trip. That's a little bit safer for us right now. I think that's my favorite.
Mine is music. Joyce is a wonderful singer in Spanish, English, Portuguese, and I've been a guitarist for the last several decades. So we've played around in bands around Denver. We're not doing it right now, but we've had a lot of wonderful musical experiences just in clubs and private parties and things like that.
It's good to use that part of your brain when you're writing about true crime all the time, and you get to use that other part of your right.
You can be a very average musician and make people really happy really quickly.
Especially if they're
by doing a few small things, as opposed to trying to write a book about a very dark subject. That always produces pushback.
If you can get people to get up and dance, that's a good feeling,
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Songwriting could be another avenue, maybe. Move on to cinema. Can I ask what your favorite film is and why?
So many. I have so many, numerous ones. I have to go back to The Godfather 1 and 2. Classic. There's so many good lines from it. It was so well written. I remember reading that Mario Puzo novel back in the 70s, I think, when it was written. And I will still watch that film when it comes on. I never get tired of watching it.
I like a movie called Midnight Run. It stars Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin. It's about a bounty hunter who goes to New York to pick up Charles Grodin, who's involved in a crime, and bring him back to Los Angeles, and all of the things that they go through to get there on a deadline. So it's very funny. It's very well written. It's extremely well acted. I mean, it's one of the better parts I've seen Robert De Niro in. He's got a sense of humor.
Oh, so we both have Robert De Niro.
Yeah, well, he's hard to beat. Yeah. And Grodin is terrific in his part.
Excellent choices, because De Niro's my favorite actor of all time. So, and Godfather 2, I think, is the greatest sequel of all time. So, yeah, great choices.
What is Godfather 3, though? Let me ask you one question.
It's not a bad film, but no, not in the same league as the first two. No way. Your favorite novelist? Next question.
I'd have to say Jane Austen.
Yeah, I mean, I got hung up in Henry James, as I said, in my 20s. William Faulkner here in the United States. I mean, the great theme of the United States is always race. It's always racial relations. He wrote probably the most profound books about that will ever be written.
And Mark Twain.
About the history of race and the entire texture of all of that. So, brilliant human beings.
If you could have had a different profession, what would it have been? If you could have done anything else other than writing?
I have two. I would have either been a ballet dancer prima ballerina, or I would have been in musical theater, you know, on Broadway. Yeah, singing and dancing, but mostly singing. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, I would probably have been an athlete if I had been good enough to do something really well. I grew up, that's why I've written some books about sports, but I grew up saturated in it, and I would love to be able to have, you know, retired at 40 with $50 million, you know, on a body that might be intact. I love competition, not in the arts. I don't think competition belongs in the arts, but in sports, it brings out things in people that are quite wonderful. Again, to refer once again to our Ted Lasso show, you see it in that, this camaraderie, this wonderful interaction.
And I'm not even a big sports
No,
fan.
you don't have to be, but a lot of things
But
going around it where
yeah.
people really do bond for life, and it's quite interesting.
Next one, who would you say has been your greatest inspiration in life?
Well, this might sound kind of schmaltzy, but I think my inspiration was that I didn't have to go through World War II.
Mm.
I didn't have to be a prisoner of war. I didn't have to kill people, drop bombs on them. And so I feel like I should do something worthwhile, as I would define it, in life. And I was inspired by what those people did.
Yeah.
Well, it's very hard for me. We have a 28-year-old son, as Joyce said. It's very hard for me to imagine my dad and millions of other guys at 20,
Exactly.
and 21 and 22
Right.
going through the things that they did, and people all over the world, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it was horrible for Europe and bad enough for the United States. But I think I was inspired to say, well, if I don't have to do that, I should try to do something useful. And that, you know.
I think I was inspired by my mother, very strong, had a lot of grace, showed me how to live, also showed me how to die. I think as a parent, that's all you really can impart to your children. You know, how to try to live with grace and strength and make the right choices. And then when it's time to die, you know, do that as best as you can also, because we all have to face it. So she showed me a lot of courage during life and death.
Yeah.
Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I don't read them. I don't read the hard copies anymore. They've shrunk. Our Denver paper has shrunk so much. So it's definitely, but it's ads. So what I do is I get my news from usually online, Facebook, Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, you know, Denver Post. I try to read a combination of all the news sources just to keep atop of what's going on. You know, what do you?
I go through the New York Times and the Washington Post every morning. I can't say that I read a lot unless I'm very interested in something, but I just like, you know, it's like having a ticker tape almost in front of you, like they used to have the Associated Press and all of that.
You mean at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, I mean, you can keep up with what's happening that way. And yeah.
We move on to food next. What's your favorite food, or what do you like to cook for a meal?
She's an excellent cook.
Well, my family can cook New Mexican food, so I can cook New Mexican type of food, which is quite different from Mexican food.
Right.
You know, chilies, enchiladas. I don't know what kind of, if they have that kind of food in Bristol or the UK.
Yeah.
Can you get Mexican or New Mexican?
Mexican, yeah. Indian cuisine I like very much.
The hot and spicy.
I like spicy food, yeah. So anything spicy for me.
Well, the chili that I make is very similar to a curry. You know, you can make it as hot as you want or mild as you want. Sort of like mole in Mexico, but yeah, we have red and green chili in this part of the country, and so yeah, that's my favorite. What do you like?
She's an excellent cook, and I'm an excellent eater.
True.
So that's a good combination. But cheese enchiladas are
pretty good. Hard to beat.
Hard to beat. I would have that anytime. So
if you had to choose one person, who would you say is your favorite cultural icon?
Oh, that's a hard one.
I loved James Brown and Ray Charles. I thought, as I said, I've always been attracted to music, and um, from a very early age, and something about black music and soul music and all of that music just hit me in places I didn't know I had. I didn't know I had a soul until I heard those guys sing.
Yeah.
And then it was like there are dimensions that we have that have to be activated by certain sounds, certain vibrations, certain performers. And it opened up a doorway for me into the whole life experience in the United States. I mean, I wasn't getting it out of books, and I certainly wasn't getting it out of the culture. I grew up in a tiny Midwestern town. So when I stumbled onto that stuff when I was about 14 or 15, it opened up a new world. And it was part of the motivation in writing the Alan Berg book. These racist people doing these horrible things and all of that. I had an interest in that for 20 years prior to that.
I think you have different cultural icons at different ages. Okay. So I'm in my 60s now. My cultural icon when I was in my 20s or 30s would be different. At this age, I would say I'm more interested in spiritual icons. I read books about Ramakrishna or Yogananda or Gandhi, or like I said, comparative religions are much more interesting to me, the Upanishads. I just find comfort and solace and the such sophisticated thought, the Sufi, the mystical offshoots of the major religions. That's really what I am more interested in now than cultural icons.
And you're allowed to say this next one. I do enjoy asking this. What's your favorite curse word and why?
Horseshit is mine. I like horseshit.
I'd have to say fuck. Yeah. Fuck is just has a punch to it, like no other.
I only use horseshit on special occasions.
Yeah.
Or I use fuck.
Okay, included tonight. Couple more left. What's your favorite place or holiday destination?
Favorite place or a holiday destination? I would say two places: New Mexico, and I like the Caribbean. I like the Yucatan. I like snorkeling in the warm waters of the Yucatan. I like exploring the Mayan ruins there. It's fabulous. Yeah. It's like warm bathwater temperature, crystal clear water. And when you live in a state like Denver or Colorado, you're surrounded by mountains. And so I like to go to the ocean, at least once a year.
Yeah, there's something about the American Southwest that others, D.H. Lawrence, from right on down, George O'Keeffe, I mean, even Trotsky, found it a somewhat magical place. Many people have talked about that. We go down to New Mexico a lot. We are always re-energized, refocused. When we come back,
it's an energy.
It's the quality of light. There's a certain energy there.
A lot of artists.
A lot of creativity, and great food, great views, vistas. So that's
probably our favorite place and we could just drive down there. I mean, it takes us 5 hours to get in the car and drive to Taos. Yeah. So it's quick and easy for us to escape when we need to escape.
5 hours is not far in America. To us, that's like an eternity, 5 hours. But for you, that's not far at all, is it, Dennis?
Yeah, for us, yeah.
5 hours for us, right down south, is almost like being in Scotland, nearly right at the top of the map. So,
are you close to Stonehenge?
Yeah, not far. Yeah, quite close. Yeah, probably about an hour away. Yeah. Are you
close to Bath?
Yes. Yeah.
Love to go there.
20 minutes from Bath. So yeah. Next one for you, Stephen. Music. Who's your favorite music artist and your favorite album, both?
Favorite musical artist, and what was the second question?
Your favorite album.
Oh, album. Artist.
Well,
album.
I grew up again with an attachment to the blues. This is rather obscure, but as a guitar player, everybody has heroes, and before there was Jeff Beck and before there was Eric Clapton and before there was Jimmy Page, there was a kid in Chicago named Mike Bloomfield, and he played in the Butterfield Blues Band. And their first album, which was I think just called the Butterfield Blues Band, came out. And I was 15 and I just bought a cheap guitar and I would spend hours just sitting listening to him play. And he died way too young, as so many of these guitarists have, with his own substance abuse problems and all that. But I learned more probably listening to him play the guitar than anyone else. And this is now, what, how many years later? 35, 56 years later. And I still, draw things from that. So it was just, those musical experiences that hit us at that age, they just grow inside of us throughout our lives.
I would have to say there's so many. It's hard to narrow it down, but I would say Joni Mitchell was influential to me. I thought she was a poet. She could paint. She could sing. She could play the guitar. She could play the piano. Her voice when she was younger was very lyrical and like a high soprano. And her words really spoke to me. And so I would say Blue or For the Roses or Ladies of the Canyon, any Joni Mitchell albums, the early years were highly influential for me.
And now, two very good choices again. The two final questions. Firstly, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Well, you mean as far as work or personal life?
Any, to be honest.
I think we have a body of work that spans 30 years and numerous books. And like I said, we landed on in the Senate Majority Leader of the United States balcony, looking out at the mall, and it was like being in ancient Rome, looking out at the empire. That was a high point.
Yeah.
Seeing those people being put to work when one of the books was made into a movie, it was a high point. And then, of course, raising a child, to manhood, good person, self-confident, works with us. I'd say my son is probably best achievement.
I think by far the biggest achievement is to keep going. There are lots of reasons to quit in this kind of work. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of waiting, all of those things. And anybody who's written a book knows that you get to a point where you're sick of it. You don't want to ever hear of it again. But my great goal in life is just to preserve my sense of freedom in working and living. And I feel like, I've been very lucky to be able to do that. Some things are lucrative, some things are not lucrative, some things fall apart. But if you keep going, some guy living over there in Bristol, England, sends you an email and says, I want to talk to you. This is wonderful for us. Yeah. You've given us a great opportunity to explore something that I was writing on in 1985. Took 2 years to get that book to come out. So the fact that you can do something, that it goes out into the world, that it touches other people, some don't like it, some like it. 36 years later, you get an email and somebody wants to talk to you and you get to actually express some of the things you feel the deepest about in your whole life. I mean, your inspirations, your goals, your this, that, and the other. That only happens if you persevere. You have to persevere. I'll make a plug also. The Talk to Death is going to be re-released this fall by a new press. So it's the same book with a new introduction covering the last 3 decades on this subject.
Yeah,
but,
and on our website, which is www.stephensingular.com, that's where all the up-to-date news is on when books are going to be re-released or what programs we're going to be on. That's the best place for people to go if they want to learn more about what we do and what we've done and what we're looking forward to in the future.
Yeah, don't give up.
We don't have to retire when you're a writer.
No, you don't
have to.
And the last question for this evening, or shall I say afternoon where you are, how do you both wish to be remembered?
Oh, well, I should have studied those questions harder. I would just like to be remembered as being a hard worker, being persevering, going through tough times. It's not easy writing about the subject material and some of the things we've had to endure going through these stories. These are very high profile crimes that we've covered. You know, the O.J. Simpson case, the John Benet Ramsey case. People all over the world are still interested in these cases, and they're controversial and you're unconventional. So I guess I wouldn't mind just being known as that she persevered and she co-created with others and she worked and she enjoyed working. You know, she loved her work.
When I started to look into the Berg book, 1985, essentially, a number of people in Denver, friends and others said, you know, why write about that? That guy was obnoxious. He's not a national figure. He's provincial. And, you know, why waste your time on such a person as that? Well, again, it was about race. It was about culture, race and culture, politics. The heart of the American experience is race and those particular issues and how religion affects that and all of those things. And I didn't listen to them. I listened to myself. I knew that there was something there. I didn't know it was going to resonate into the future the way it has, but I knew that there was something in that subject that was worth exploring and that it wasn't just a guy with a loud nasal voice on the radio in Denver. And I sensed that even before we knew everything about the case. So I listened to myself. You know, that's a worthwhile thing to do when there are other people telling you not to do it. It's almost an axiom that if a lot of people are telling you don't look into this, there might be something there. I follow that.
Thank you kindly for joining me on Your Take today. For me, it's been a fascinating 60-minute conversation, finding out about writing, true crime, the research and all the dedication and perseverance that goes into it. And I very much loved Stephen's answer on the greatest inspiration at the end. Just to finish up, Talk to Death is being re-released. You mentioned the website as well. How do we find out more information again on your books and any future projects?
Just by going to the website, because everything is up there. We update that website, you know, every other day.
Yes.
So, and things are happening all the time, things that we haven't even talked about today. So yeah, so just go to the website and yeah, you'll see what we're working on and what's being made into a movie and what's next.
And there are books that are up on Kindle and Amazon, you know,
updated books,
very inexpensive online books for those who are interested in that. They can find those on Amazon Kindle.
Thanks once again. I wish you all the best in the future. And yeah, thanks for joining me today on Your Take.
Enjoyed it too.
Thank you very
much.
James. Very well.